It's a really interesting balance. I mean, 3% of the population's of Indian descent in Australia, and some of them in some pretty critical seats in Western Sydney and places like that. So sorry to go straight onto the politics, but he's treading a fine line, this one. And, you know, we've got a lot of Conservative commentators getting stuck into Scott Morrison here because it's like, you know, this closed border policy, what do we have quarantine for? So it's been interesting, the reaction over the last 12 to 18 hours.
I guess the concern being that you increase the risk of it seeping out if you're continuing to take hundreds of people from India.
Well, that's exactly right, but he didn't say that specifically, did he? But what he did when I put it on him yesterday, I said, well, why? He said, well, the quarantine facilities can't cope. Well, you know, that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
But because they seem to be.
Well, so on the one hand, the PM says 99.9999, however many nines he said, % of the time it doesn't leak.
Which is true.
And then he says they can't cope. Well, the issue is WA gets 1-2 cases and locks down, isn't it? That's really the issue here. So we've got to change our thinking in relation to this.
Well, Mark McGowan, he's got no faith in his tracing system at all, does he?
Yeah, but then he says Christmas Island, onto you guys. And that becomes an interesting argument in itself because there's been no real will from the feds to take it on, even partly, in my view. Like Howard Springs has probably been the most successful. Why can't we build that up a bit more or have a few more facilities like that?
Is there an option to do that? Or what's at 3,000 capacity at the moment?
I don't think Morrison wants to own the issue, to be blunt. And who would want to? Because whenever there's an outbreak, there's a leak from one of those facilities. Now, he says it needs to be airports, needs to be near hospitals, and that's the advice he has too. But nevertheless, Jane Holton put out there a couple of options like RAAF Learmonth, and the feds are really steering me away from that.
But it doesn't matter where these facilities are going to be, there's going to be leaks, which is what Paul Kelly said last night.
Yeah, so let the states own it and they can get the blame if there's a leak, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole problem with the pandemic all the way through, this blame game. It's always been the problem with our federation. And essentially, when McGowan gets a leak, and we've heard that there was inadequate airflow in one of those hotels, he said, well, this is the Fed's fault for pushing quarantine onto the states. And I think a lot of his populace buys it. So I tried to get the PM yesterday to say that WA shouldn't have locked down. He wouldn't go near it because he doesn't want to lose seats in WA. They're maniacal over there in terms of their support of McGowan and the zero cases approach.
Yeah. Hey, the drumbeats of war seems to be happening. Are you hearing them?
I'm not hearing them, but I'm reading Michael Pizzullo. Look, I don't know if it was the best move from him, to be frank.
Well, I mean, he would know. He'd know. He's got access to all of the intelligence, and you know the Brits are sending warships into the region for training exercises, and the Americans are coming here. There's a bit going on.
Why talk it up unless you want to get blown up?
Well, you want to send a message, I suppose.
What kind of a message is Australia going to be able to send to China?
Well, I guess not much. If China's saying last night, Australia is not that strong, it's not that powerful, that if it insists on intervening, it will only cause greater damage to Australia itself.
Look, let's all pray for no war, I would have thought.
But that's one thing.
I thought the piece, look, I've just got to be frank about this. I quite respect Michael Pizzullo, but I think the piece was pretty loose, Peter. It was a loose piece from a secretary of a department. How many secretaries of departments get that sort of leeway? And Karen Andrews ticked off on it. Would Peter Dutton have ticked off on it? We've got a potential yes minister situation occurring here.
Right, okay. And what about this announcement today? What do you make of it so far? $750 million worth? I think it was already announced last year.
Well, I think what's interesting is the timing after the Pizzullo piece.
Yeah.
I mean, when I asked Scott Morrison about this yesterday, he was saying we're for peace. Knowing that he had this announcement, the Whigs, he can't have been that thrilled with Michael Pizzullo's op-ed piece. And I do think that potentially has harmed his chances of becoming Secretary of the Department of Defence, but let's see.
Okay.